What's up, guys? Welcome to part 8 of the LS swap in my 97 Land Cruiser. And I know it says Lexus on it. I know. Anyway, we're going to talk about wiring, which is usually a pretty scary and ominous task for a fuel-injected engine swap, especially an OBD2 vehicle. But the main topic of wiring is going to be getting the factory tach to work. Now, instrumentation is pretty important to me. I had to have all the factory gauges working, which there's only one left after this, and it's not that big of a deal. But the factory tach was kind of a big deal. I had pretty much a week of pulling my hair out, trying all these things I read on the internet, and none of them actually working until I talked to a much smarter than me friend of mine who made a very dumb suggestion, which I should have thought of, and that happened to fix it. So I'm going to show you what I did. I'm also going to cover how I put the interior back together, and it feels great to see a complete interior, and the shrinking mountain of things that I still need to do to be able to drive it, and hopefully another video with me driving it is around the corner. But I've got diagrams in this. If you have any questions of the wiring on this, any questions at all, don't hesitate to drop a comment. Don't forget to subscribe, as I'm going to continue this video series until this thing is done, and then probably have some off-roading and driving videos, which, well, that's wishful thinking at this point, but we're close. Anyway, I'm going to jump right in, follow along. Alright, so the first step here before we get into any of the wiring is to get the instrument cluster out, because we have to make a modification to the factory tachometer. To do that, you got to kind of pull the left side of the dash apart. I'm not going to go over every step because you guys can figure that out if you're at this point. But it's the lower dash, the middle here, and then this surround comes off, and then the cluster comes out. It's just a bunch of Phillips screws. It's pretty simple. You unplug it, you pull it out. Then you pull the tabs and remove the cover for the instrument cluster. And then when you get to the back of the instrument cluster, there are 3 Phillips screws that hold the tach into the gauge cluster. Now, once you get the tach out, you'll see where I'm going to show you this picture. Here's a picture where you can see there's a resistor and a diode next to each other, and you need to install a jumper wire which pretty much bypasses the resistor next to that diode. And that's the only real modification you need to do. You can solder a wire in there, you can use a leg from a new capacitor or light or whatever. Any jumper wire works, but you have to jump that for this to work. Then you just reassemble and reinstall the instrument cluster. So before we jump into the actual diagram, let's talk about the one component you're going to need to buy. It's called a Dakota Digital SGI 8. Now there's a couple revisions. I think the latest one is E, which is the most common and easy to find. They're not very expensive. You can buy them pretty much anywhere. It comes with some instructions and directions, but it's a little confusing, especially since it says like some early Toyota tachometers require this output, which, what's early? I mean, that's relative. Is early like early 2000s or is early like 1960s? So I'm going to kind of clear all that up and how you need to hook that up, as well as where you need to get your signal from, which is the most important part of this video. So the big problem with getting that tach to work was actually the source of the tach output. I don't know why PSI Racing tells you that you can use the optional tach output from the E38 PCM, and I imagine this is the same on the P59, which is the earlier style, the big 2-connector one. So the output, it's like an optional wire. It's a white wire. It's part of your dash harness that comes with the PSI Racing harness, and it doesn't have enough signal. The signal is not adequate to drive the factory tach, even with the Dakota Digital box. It's not really a booster as much as it is just a signal converter. So no matter what I did, if I got my tach signal from where it told me to, the tach wouldn't even move. It wouldn't even act like it was trying to do something. So in frustration, I reached out to a friend of mine, and he told me, well, why don't you get it from a different source? And like a coil. So that's exactly what I did, and here is your coil connector. So working backwards, this is the connector that goes into each individual coil. It doesn't matter which one you use, they're all pinned the same. So A is ground, B is their low reference, C is ignition signal, and D is coil power. Now C is the most important. That's the switch signal that we need to drive the tach. So what I did is I use a multimeter to figure out where terminal C ended up in the main, like the sub harness for the coil connector, and I figured out that it was this terminal right here. Now this is going to change depending on which cylinder you go with. I chose cylinder 2. It's on the passenger side. It's closest to the dash harness, so the wiring wasn't going to be that long. And I also chose it because of its ease of access at this point. So you can choose any cylinder. The wire colors will change, but the process, the thought behind this is all the same. I'm not a huge fan of cutting harnesses, so what I ended up doing is I went to the salvage yard and I got this connector and this connector. These are both the coil harness, that white connector from another vehicle, which allowed me to build this extension harness, which is literally, as it sounds, it's just a harness is about this long, which gave me the ability of adding that one wire to splice in without modifying my engine harness or my coil harness, which that wire, as I have showed you, was the ignition signal, which runs to the SGI-8. To hook up everything you need to the SGI-8, it's pretty simple now that you know you're getting a proper signal. The top is your power. It's just 12 volts when key is on or running. The second one is your ground. You don't use the third one. And the Tach in is number 4. You do not use the next two, but the second from bottom is your Tach out. It says normal on the SGI-8. You don't need to use any kind of jumper wires like it says. You don't have to use the high volt or out 3. It's just one wire from Tach out, and that runs to your dash harness. Now this is the connector for the factory 1FZ computer. You need to depin or cut, I depinned it, terminal 10, which is a black wire, and that runs to the factory tachometer, and that is all you need to do to get the factory tach to work, except you have to set up your SGI-8. So in your SGI-8 instructions, it shows that you have to go in and select the number of cylinders that you're getting your signal from and the number of cylinders that your tachometer is designed for. Intuitively, you would think that you would need to select in 8 and out 6. However, it doesn't really matter how many cylinders the engine is, since you're getting signal from just one coil. So your in is going to be 1 and your out is going to be set to 6, and then you have the option of high or low, and I set mine to high, and everything seems to work. It works perfect. So here is that extension harness I talked about. These are the two connectors from the salvage yard, and this one plugs into your engine harness. This one plugs into the coil harness, and then there's that one wire which I need to do something with, and that runs to the SGI-8E. I know that seemed a little complicated, but it's really quite simple. If you have any questions about any of that process, or if you want a picture of my diagram, I'm happy to send you one. Anyway, I'm going to move forward and show you what else that needs to be done with the engine harness, starting with what you need and what you don't need. I recommend you have your engine harness out to strip everything. I don't know how you would ever do that. So anyway, the engine bay side of the engine harness, you only need a few things. The main thing being this connector. This is the transfer case connector, which plugs in well underneath the vehicle. I also saved this ground, which completes the ECM circuit. You need your starter signal, which I haven't kind of cleaned up. I actually cleaned this harness up. As you can see, it looks nice. And then your water temp sending unit, and that's it for the engine bay stuff. You also need two connectors called IL1 and IL2. The IL1 is the big one. You need to save almost every terminal in that, and then I think there's only 2 wires necessary in IL2. You may not even need those, but I left them in there. I pretty much depinned that harness terminal by terminal using the factory wiring diagrams, which, if you would like the factory engine control unit wiring diagrams, feel free to drop a comment. I'm happy to send those to you. Here is the factory transmission harness. It's like a transmission and transfer case harness, and you do have to delete a few things from that. I deleted this little short harness. This has 2 connectors that go to, I think they go to line pressure or temperature sensor. I'm not quite sure. You don't need it because you don't have the factory transmission. And then this is the connector right here that you would find in that big connector. You'd have both of these together in factory form. And then like this one's a transfer case, which you need to keep, and this one's a transmission, so you can pretty much rip this harness out of that and then retape it, which is what I've done. And I ended up running this harness through this body mount on the frame, and then I'm going to attach it down in the fender well area. I'm not quite sure how I'll do that, but I got to keep that out of debris. I'll probably build a shield to keep stuff from hitting it, because that will cause a problem. The next thing I need to do for the next video is do something with the intake, because this is not going to cut it. What I intended to do originally was run the factory airbox, and I actually had it hooked up that way, but it is pretty restrictive, and I really did not like the way it fit. So my plan now is to run the factory Tahoe or Silverado airbox and relocate the washer reservoir to this location, since there's nothing here anymore. I'm probably not going to be able to use the factory washer reservoir, so I'll look for one from a different type of vehicle, and when I find the right one, I will let you guys know what I got it from. Earlier in this video, I had mentioned that I put the interior back together. I am very happy with this looking complete again. This is just fantastic to see my truck back, and also to have the radio functioning and have all the gauges functioning with the exception of oil pressure. I still need to do that, which is literally just a fitting and one wire. But everything else is pretty much done as far as the interior is concerned. I do have to wire the reverse lights in as well. That's going to be a little more daunting because there's not really a mechanical reverse switch in the shifter. That would be the easiest thing to do, but it doesn't exist. A few other things I need to get done before the next video is I need to get the fans operational, which is just wiring them up. Hopefully it's pretty easy. I have a small coolant leak to fix, and a belt squeak, which you probably heard. I also have to wire the reverse lights, which I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that, since the reverse lights from this generation of GM ECM are triggered from a CAN signal. So that'll be something to figure out. I also have to get the oil pressure gauge working, which is literally installing a fitting. That'll probably be simple. And then there's things like, I have to make AC lines still, which I've been putting those off for a while, and wire the AC compressor. That's not going to be that big of a deal. That's kind of optional. I'm close to actually driving it, so I'm focused on the things that are required for that to happen. But we're close. We're really close. So don't forget to subscribe. The next video will be right around the corner. Thanks, guys.